I'm a police officer, and I was on the trail of a woman who vanished without a trace. The call came in near the end of my shift, and from the way dispatch explained it, I already knew it wasn't going to be simple. A man said his wife had disappeared inside their house without making a sound, without leaving anything behind, and without any possible way to explain how she could have left. When I arrived, the house didn't give anything unusual either. It looked clean, quiet, and completely normal. The man looked confused in a way that didn't seem exaggerated. She was in the kitchen. I went to talk to her. She wasn't there anymore. She couldn't have left. I stepped inside and started looking around, and the house felt like someone had interrupted a normal day without leaving any trace behind. I checked each room carefully, paying attention to details that could help me understand what happened, but nothing I saw pointed in any direction. Her phone was still on the table. Her shoes were by the door, and there were no signs of forced entry or movement that didn't belong. When I reached the living room, I started noticing small inconsistencies that didn't match the rest of the house. A frame facing the wrong direction, a lamp slightly tilted, and a chair placed facing a blank wall instead of the center of the room. I stopped in front of that chair because something about it felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. I didn't feel fear, but I didn't feel comfortable touching it either. When I grabbed the chair to move it, the floor gave out completely under my weight, and instead of falling in a normal way, I dropped straight down like the ground had been removed on purpose. The fall lasted long enough for me to realize I wasn't going to land anywhere familiar, and when I hit the ground, the impact didn't match the distance I expected because the surface absorbed most of it. When I stood up, I immediately understood I wasn't in the house anymore. The space around me looked like an empty office that stretched too far in every direction, with yellow walls, low ceilings, and fluorescent lights that made a constant noise that didn't stop. There were no windows, no doors, and no visible exit, and that alone was enough to make it clear I wasn't dealing with anything normal. Before moving, I stayed still and listened closely because I needed to know if I was alone. I tried my radio, but all I got was static, and after a few attempts, I stopped using it because it wasn't going to help. I started walking with my weapon ready, moving through hallways that didn't follow any clear structure, and after a while, I tried to turn back, only to realize that the path I had taken didn't exist the way I remembered it. That was the moment I understood I wasn't getting out easily. Time passed without giving me anything useful, and the repetition of the space started to wear on me because every direction looked almost the same. I kept moving because stopping didn't feel like a safe option, and eventually, I began to notice small changes that made the place feel less empty than it first appeared. At some point, I heard a sound that didn't belong to the environment, and I stopped immediately to focus on it because it came and went too quickly to ignore. It sounded like something brushing against the surface and then pulling away, and even though it didn't repeat right away, it stayed in my head long enough to change the way I moved. I turned and watched the hallway behind me, and after a few seconds, I heard it again, but this time it came from closer, and the movement behind it didn't match anything human. The lights above me flickered once, and during that moment, something crossed from one side of the hallway to the other. I fired in its direction, and the sound of the shot filled the entire space in a way that made it hard to tell where I was standing, because it didn't echo in a normal way. When the noise settled, there was no response from whatever I had seen. I stayed where I was, listening for anything that would confirm I had hit something. But the silence came back heavier than before, like the space itself was reacting to the sound. I moved forward slowly, paying attention to every detail around me. After a few turns, a smell started to seep through the air, and it was enough to tell me I was getting closer to something physical. I followed it carefully, and when I reached the source, I saw something pull itself out of a pipe in the wall. Its body didn't match anything normal, and the way it moved made it clear it wasn't human. When it noticed me, it made a low sound that felt directed at me. I fired twice and saw the impact, but instead of falling, it twisted and moved away quickly, dragging itself across the floor in a way that made it hard to follow. I chased it for a short distance, but the layout worked against me, and after a few turns, it disappeared completely. I stopped chasing and focused on listening, because I needed to understand how it was moving, and after a few seconds, I heard it again. But this time it came from a different direction, and the pattern made it clear it wasn't running away. It was moving around me. Before moving again, I stayed still and listened carefully, because I didn't want to walk into something without warning. And when I finally took a step forward, I did it slowly, keeping my attention on every sound around me. It came out of the wall again, this time closer and more visible, pushing part of its body through a gap that shouldn't have been there. Its head didn't have clear features, and when it opened its mouth, the shape didn't match anything human. I fired again, hitting it in the head and shoulder, but it didn't react the way I expected because it pulled itself back into the wall and disappeared completely as if the surface had closed around it. After that, I didn't try chasing it again because I understood I wasn't dealing with something I could track in a normal way. I kept moving, staying alert, and after a while, I started losing track of time because nothing in that place changed enough to measure it. I rested once, sitting against the wall while keeping my weapon ready. And when I stood up again, my body felt weaker and my focus wasn't as sharp as before. I started praying quietly. I knew Jesus was going to help me. I'm going to find you. By what I think was the third day, I could hear it moving at a distance more often, and each time it felt closer than before, like it was waiting for me to slow down completely. When I moved closer, the floor gave out again, and I fell without control, hitting a harder surface than before. When I looked up, I recognized the living room immediately, and that realization pushed me to move quickly. The chair was in the same position, and the floor looked normal. And when I checked it, there was no sign that anything had opened there before. I didn't stay long enough to question it, because being back didn't feel safe. I left the house and stepped outside, and everything looked normal again, like nothing had happened, and that made it harder to decide what I was supposed to do next. When I gave my report, I explained everything in detail, including the fall, the place I ended up in, and the things I saw moving there. And even though they wrote everything down without interrupting me, it was clear from their reactions that they didn't have a way to process it as something real. The investigation moved forward without me, and from what I was told later, they searched the house multiple times, checked the surrounding area, and followed every lead they could find. But nothing came up. Not a single trace that could explain where she had gone or how she had left. Not a single trace that could explain where she had gone or how she had left. There were no signs of struggle, no fingerprints out of place, no camera footage showing her leaving, and no evidence of anyone entering the house, as if she had vanished from the face of the earth. The case stayed open for a while, but without evidence or direction, it slowly stopped moving, and eventually, it became one of those files that got revisited occasionally without leading anywhere, because there's nothing to build on. I don't know where she went, and I don't know where I was, but I'm sure those two things are connected, and whatever took her didn't leave anything behind because it didn't need to. I spent months reading about the Backrooms like it was something real that just hadn't been proven yet. Going through forums, saved threads, and videos that most people treated like a joke, but that I took seriously enough to study. I wasn't interested in the stories themselves. I focused on the patterns, the repeated details, the small coincidences that showed up in accounts from different people who didn't know each other. I stopped answering messages, stopped going out unless I had a reason tied to this, and even when I was outside, I wasn't really there. I was scanning everything around for something that didn't fit. Sleep got worse. My head always felt heavy, but I ignored it because I thought I was getting closer. The idea was simple and it showed up everywhere I looked, even if people described it differently, and that was the only thing I trusted. You don't just walk into the Backrooms. You find a mistake in reality, something small that most people would ignore, and you push through it. That was the rule I worked with, and I kept repeating it. At first, I thought I was seeing those mistakes everywhere, but none of them actually worked when I tested them. I would stop in the middle of a place and stare at something that looked slightly off, convinced that this time it was real, and every time I got close enough to check, it behaved normally again. My thoughts started looping in a way that made it hard to stop, because even when I knew I was probably wrong, I still checked again just in case. I was losing my mind. But one day I ended up inside a shopping center without planning it. Just walking in after being outside for too long, and I sat near an escalator to rest for a bit without paying attention to anything specific. At first, everything felt normal enough that I almost left. Then I noticed the plant next to me, and one of its leaves moved in a way that didn't match anything around it. It wasn't wind. It wasn't contact. It was a short, sharp glitch like a frame skipping in a video. I stayed still and watched it repeat the exact same motion, and that's when my focus locked in completely. Before doing anything, I checked the rest of the environment carefully because I had made mistakes before and I didn't want to rush again. People were moving normally, the lighting was stable, reflections matched perfectly, and nothing else showed any kind of delay or distortion. That made the plant stand out even more. I stood up and moved closer, keeping my eyes on that same leaf as it glitched again in the same controlled way. When I reached out and pushed my hand into the plant, there was no resistance at all, and my hand passed through like the space inside it wasn't fully there. I didn't stop to think about it. I stepped forward and then turned around. The shopping center was still there, but it was empty. But everything that made the place normal was gone, and the absence of people made it feel wrong immediately in a way that was hard to ignore. The lighting was uneven, some areas dim and others too bright, and the only constant sound was a low electrical hum that replaced everything else. It wasn't silence, but it wasn't normal either. Before moving too far, I forced myself to slow down and take in as much as I could, because reacting without thinking would only make things worse. My phone had no signal. The time didn't change, and there were no sounds beyond that hum. The environment felt static, like it wasn't meant to change at all. When I started walking, my steps echoed more than they should, making the space feel larger than it actually was. The stores were open but wrong inside, with missing items, misplaced objects, and shelves that didn't match the type of store they were in. Everything looked like a copy built from memory with mistakes in it. I went back to where the plant should have been, hoping I could leave the same way I came in, but it was gone completely. And that's when it became clear that I wasn't getting out easily. I stayed near the main area at first, trying to keep some sense of direction, but it didn't take long to realize that the layout wasn't reliable enough to navigate normally. Every turn led to something that looked familiar, but not identical. And the longer I walked, the less I trusted my own sense of where I had been before. I tried marking walls and counting steps, but none of it worked because the environment didn't stay consistent. Before anything changed, there was a shift that made me stop completely, because it was the first time the place reacted to something instead of staying still. The lights began to turn off in sections, moving slowly toward where I was, and the hum above got louder in the areas that remained lit. The pattern didn't feel random. When I heard the sound the first time, I stayed still instead of running, because I needed to understand what I was dealing with. It was metallic, controlled, repeating with a pause in between, like something mechanical being handled with intention. The rhythm didn't change, and that made it worse. I moved into a nearby store and stayed low behind a counter, watching the main hallway through a narrow angle, and that's when I saw him walk across the open space. He was holding a shotgun, moving slowly, and a part of his face was missing in a way that didn't make sense. Not damaged, but simply gone, leaving an empty space where there should have been structure. When he turned slightly in my direction, I pulled back and stayed hidden, but the sound stopped, and that silence made it clear that he had noticed something. I moved out through a side exit and into a hallway, trying to create distance while keeping my movement controlled. But the environment made every sound carry further than it should. The lights above flickered harder now, breaking my visibility in short intervals, and I kept moving because stopping would only make it easier for him to find me. Before I ran into him again, there was a moment where everything aligned in a way that made it unavoidable, because the hallway ended and forced me to turn back. I slowed down without meaning to, knowing I didn't have another path, and the sound returned, closer and unchanged. When I saw him again, he was already positioned at the other end, blocking the only way out, and this time, the shotgun was raised directly at me. Up close, the missing part of his face shifted slightly at the edges, like it wasn't stable, while the rest of him stayed completely still. I ran toward him because I had no space to turn, and when I hit him, his body didn't feel fully solid, which made the contact unstable. The shot went off behind me, hitting the wall without reacting the way it should, and I kept running until I lost my footing and slammed into a wall hard enough to drop me completely. This time, I didn't get back up. I woke up in a hospital with everything back to normal. People talking, machines running, light consistent, and the contrast made it hard to process what had happened. They told me I had fallen in the shopping center and hit my head, and that someone found me near an escalator. When I tried to explain what I experienced, it didn't hold up, and they treated it like a hallucination caused by the injury. Over the next few days, they repeated the same explanation. Stress, lack of sleep, head trauma, and eventually I stopped arguing because it sounded more reasonable the more I tried to explain it. They cleared me to leave after one more night. That night, I sat alone in the room, quiet, with nothing left to say, and my attention drifted to a small plant near the window without thinking too much about it. Before anything happened, I stayed still and checked everything else around me, making sure I wasn't repeating the same mistakes again. The lighting wasn't stable. The room was normal, and nothing else showed any kind of distortion. Then one of the leaves glitched. But this time, I didn't get closer.
The thing behind the door is breathing. I can hear it through the metal, wet and heavy, like lungs filled with fluid trying to pull in air. The exit sign above glows red, perfect and clean, too perfect for a place like this. My hand is on the handle. It is warm, and it is beating like a heart. My name is David. I am 26 years old. I have been trapped in the back rooms for 3 days. If you ever blink and find yourself somewhere with yellow walls, buzzing lights, and carpet that smells like mold, you need to know one rule above everything else. When you finally see a glowing exit sign after hours of walking endless hallways, do not open that door, no matter how desperate you are, because I opened it. And now I know what is waiting on the other side. 3 days ago, I was doing something completely normal. Shopping at a grocery store near my apartment, walking down the cereal aisle, checking my phone. I reached for a box of cornflakes. My hand touched the cardboard, and then I blinked. When I opened my eyes, the store was gone. I was standing in a hallway with yellow beige walls, old damp carpet under my shoes, and fluorescent lights buzzing in panels that stretched as far as I could see. The air smelled wet and stale, like a basement sealed for decades. I spun around looking for anything familiar. There was nothing. Just more hallway, more yellow walls, more buzzing lights going on forever. I pulled out my phone. No signal, no Wi-Fi. The time said 2:47 p.m. and never seemed to move no matter how long I walked. I tried emergency services. The call failed. Just dead silence on the line. That is when the real fear set in. Not confusion. Fear. The kind that makes your hands shake and your throat close up because your body understands something your mind has not accepted yet. So I walked. Every hallway looked exactly the same. Same walls, same lights, same smell. Hours passed, but my phone said only minutes. My legs ached, my lips cracked from thirst, and my head pounded from the constant buzzing overhead. And every time I stopped to rest, I heard something behind me. Soft footsteps, never close enough to see, but always there, always following. Then I found the first message scratched into a wall. Do not trust exit. Someone else had been here. Someone who survived long enough to leave a warning. I found more after that, carved and scratched everywhere. They watch the corners. It knows your name. The lights will go out. Keep moving. Each one made my fear grow heavier. This place had rules. This place had dangers, and people had died learning them. I heard voices eventually, real human voices ahead of me, low and close. Relief flooded through me so fast I nearly cried. I ran toward them, calling out, begging them to wait. I turned a corner and saw 3 people, 2 men and a woman, all exhausted and dirty. For 1 second, their faces showed relief. Then they saw me and ran. All 3 of them sprinted away from me like I was something to be afraid of. I stood there alone, hurt and confused. And then the terrible thought came. What if the things that lived here looked like people? What if they ran from me because they already knew what I was becoming? I did not have time to process it, because that is when I saw the exit sign. Glowing red above a door with a metal handle and a real frame. Beautiful and clean, and every part of me screamed to run to it, but the scratched warning echoed in my head. Do not trust exit. I forced myself to stop, to look properly. The sign was too bright, too clean. Wrong in a way I could feel more than explain. I walked closer just to examine it, and immediately heard breathing from the other side. Wet and heavy, something large trying to stay quiet. Then the handle began to turn from the inside. I ran until I collapsed, gasping against a wall. When I looked up, I saw another message. The real exit does not have a sign. So I started searching every wall for seams, cracks, anything different, and I found it. A section that felt soft when I pressed it, swinging inward like a hidden door into total darkness. I stepped through, and I knew immediately I had made a terrible mistake. The darkness was not empty. Something was breathing in there, huge and patient. As my eyes adjusted, I understood why the wall had felt soft. It was not plaster, it was skin. Pale yellow skin stretched tight over something massive, painted to look like the hallways. I had walked straight into its mouth, the opening sealed behind me. I tried to scream, but the air was too thick, and in those final seconds before everything went black, I understood the truth. There is no exit from the back rooms. There never was. When you think you have found a way out, you are not escaping. You are just feeding whatever built this place. I woke up back in the hallways. Same walls, same lights. But my hands were covered in something dark and sticky. When I found my reflection in a dirty piece of glass on the floor, my eyes were different, darker, like something had gotten inside me while I was in that darkness. The footsteps behind me are louder now, closer. And every time I see an exit sign glowing in the distance, I feel something pulling me toward it. Not fear anymore, not even curiosity, just hunger. I think the back rooms do not destroy you. I think they change you. And when you have walked long enough and changed enough, you stop being a victim. You become part of it. Another thing behind the walls. Another set of footsteps following someone who still thinks they can escape. I can feel it happening. My thoughts are slowing down. My hunger is growing. And when I look at my reflection now, I barely recognize what looks back. The exit sign ahead is glowing. The door is waiting. And this time, I think I am going to open it.